Hi, fifth graders, and welcome to the Chapter 7 review. Today we are going to be reviewing for our Chapter 7 test. The review pages start on 483, so please follow along and write anything down that may help you remember how to solve your questions for tomorrow's tests. So for question number 1, it says Mrs. Williams is organizing her office supplies. There are 3 open boxes of paper clips in her desk drawer. Each box has 7/8 of the paper clips remaining. How many boxes of paper clips are left? Shade the model and complete the calculations below to show how you found your answer. So on Schoology, when you take your test, this will be a 2-part question. One part will be just the modeling. The second part will be the actual multiplication with the final answer. So with the modeling part, this time they are representing the 3 boxes of paper clips with the circles. Notice that we have 7/8 of the paper clips remaining from each box. So we need to shade in 7/8 of each circle to represent how much is remaining from each box of paper clips. So it doesn't matter which 7 you shade in, but just try to make sure you shade in the same 7 sections from each circle, so that way they are matching pictures. So I'm going to do the same thing to the second circle. And then to the last circle. So each circle is showing 7/8 of the amount of paper clips that are remaining. So now when we go to do the second part of this question, we actually have to figure out what the whole number times fraction equals. Remember, there are 2 ways you can do this. You can either count the number of sections that were shaded from all 3 circles, or we know that we can have a denominator of 1 underneath our whole number, and then 3 times 7 is 21, and then 1 times 8 is 8. So when we go to ask the final question, how many full boxes of paper clips, we know we have to TIBO our 21 over 8. So TIBO is top number 21 on the inside, bottom number, which is 8 on the outside. 8 does go into 21 only 2 times. 8 times 2 is 16. 21 minus 16 is 5. Now, from this answer, we know that the 2 is the whole number. The remainder, which is 5, is the numerator. And the 8 is still the denominator. Remember, when you are changing your improper fractions into mixed numbers, the denominators do not change. So my final answer is 2 5/8. Moving on to question number 2. Diana worked on her science project for 5 1/3 hours. Gabe worked on his science project for 1 1/4 times as long as Diana. Paula worked on her science project 3/4 times as long as Diana. For A through D, we need to select true or false for each statement. So for 2A, it says Diana worked longer on her science project than Gabe worked on his science project. Well, we know that Diana worked for 5 1/3 hours. That was Diana. Gabe, it says that he worked on his project 1 1/4 times as long as Diana. Well, I know that in order to figure out Gabe's, I would have to take Diana's, which is 5 1/3, and I would have to multiply it by the 1 1/4 times as long as Diana's. If we use the information that we have from lesson 7.8, when we multiply 2 mixed numbers together, we know that the product will be greater than both factors. So without doing any multiplication, I can tell that Gabe did work longer on his science project because we are multiplying two mixed numbers together. So when it says Diana worked longer on her science project than Gabe, that would be false. Again, I'd solve that without doing any multiplication, but we can multiply this just to double check. So I am going to double check for Gabe so that way I know the time Gabe spent. So when I do my circle, I have 3 times 5 is 15, plus 1 is 16, so 16 thirds times, and then 1 1/4, I have 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5, so this is 5/4. I'm going to cancel before I multiply. I see that 16 and 4 can both be divided by 4. So when I divide 16 by 4, I'm left with 4, and 4 divided by 4 is 1. Go ahead and multiply. I would have 20 over 3. And when I show my TiVo, 20 divided by 3, I know 3 does go into 20 6 times, which is 18. Subtract, it leaves me with 2. So I know that Gabe has worked for 6 2/3 hours. So I'm going to go ahead and write that right here for Gabe. So now I know Diana was 5 1/3 hours, Gabe was 6 2/3 hours. So I should be able to answer more questions just by using this information. For 2B, it says Paula worked less on her science project than Diana worked on her science project. Well, again, Diana was 5 1/3 hours, and it does say that Paula worked on her science project only 3/4 times as long as Diana. So again, we're multiplying Diana's by 3/4. From the information that we were given for the rules for 7.8, any mixed number times a fraction, the answer is less than the mixed number. Because we need to compare it to Diana's, I know that Paula worked less on her science project than Diana did. And again, that was because any mixed number times fraction is less than the mixed number. So for B, when it says Paula worked less on her science project than Diana, that is true. She did work less. Now we are going to make sure we verify our information by multiplying the 5 1/3, which we already figured out is 16 thirds, and multiply that by 3/4. So again, I'm canceling the 16 and the 4. I'm left with 4 and 1. Now the other diagonal, I can cancel the 3's, and both of those would be 1. So when I multiply, I have 4 over 1, which I know equals 4. So I know that Diana was 5 1/3 hours. Gabe, remember, was 6 2/3 hours. And now we know that Paula was 4 hours. So for C, it says Gabe worked longer on his science project than Paula worked on her science project. Well, we've already figured out that Gabe was 6 2/3 hours. We just figured out that Paula is only 4 hours. So this is true. Gabe did work longer than Paula. And finally, for number 2D, we have Gabe worked longer on his science project than Diana and Paula combined. So we do need to do some addition because it does say that word combined for Diana and Paula. So I am going to combine Diana, which is 5 1/3, plus Paula, which was 4. So 1/3 can come straight down because 1/3 plus 0 is 1/3. And then 5 plus 4 is 9. So combined, the two girls worked 9 1/3 hours. It says Gabe worked longer on his science project than the two girls combined. And we know Gabe was only 6 2/3 hours. So 9 1/3 is greater than 6 2/3. So that is false. The girls combined worked longer. All right, moving on to question number 3. It says Lois wants to carpet the rectangular floor of his basement. The basement has an area of 864 square feet. The width of the basement is its length. what is the length of Lois's basement? So we do know that it is a rectangular floor. I apologize, fifth graders. We are going to go ahead and skip question number 3. That was my fault. We do not do question number 3 on our tests. We also, on the next page, skip 4, 5, and 6. So we are going to go ahead and go on to page 485 and pick up from question number 7. So the only questions that we have so far on our test for tomorrow is questions 1 and 2. And now I'm going to go to question number 7. Question number 7 says, write each multiplication expression in the correct box. So this is using the information that we have learned from lesson 7.5 and 7.8, where we have to say whether the product is equal to 4/5, greater than 4/5, or less than 4/5. So we are going to have to use our rules that we came up with for 7.5 and 7.8. So I'm just going to go through each expression, and then I'm going to write each expression in the box. This will be a drag and drop style question when we are on Schoology, where you will drag the correct expression to the appropriate box. So our first expression, 4/5 times 1 and 1/8. So I have a fraction times a mixed number, and from lesson 7.8, anytime we have a fraction times mixed number or a mixed number times a fraction, the answer is greater than the fraction but less than the mixed number. So because each box is being compared with the 4/5, we need to compare it to the fraction. And like I said, the rule states that if I have a fraction times mixed number, the product will be greater than the fraction. So I'm going to write that expression, 4/5 times 1 and 1/8, in the box that says the product is greater than 4/5. Moving on, I have 1/3 times 4/5. So I have a fraction of 1/3 times a fraction of 4/5. From lesson 7.5, it states if we have a fraction times a fraction, our product will be less than both factors. So because it will be less than both factors, I know that I would have to put it in the box that says the product is less than 4/5. Next, we have 3 times 4/5. So I have a whole number times a fraction. And when we are taking our whole number times our fraction, the rule in 7.5 says any whole number times a fraction, the product is less than the whole number but greater than the fraction. So because it's again being compared to the fraction, I would have to place this in the greater than box. The next expression, 4/5 times 4/5, I see that I have a fraction times a fraction again. And we know that anytime when we have a fraction times a fraction, the product is less than both factors. So 4/5 times 4/5 goes in the less than box. Our next expression, I have 8/8 times 4/5. Well, I know that 8/8 equals 1 whole. So this is like taking 1 times 4/5. And from 7.5, we've learned that any number times 1 always equals that same number. So if we're multiplying 4/5 times 1, it will be equal to 4/5. So 8/8 times 4/5 goes into the equal to box. Make sure that even though you see the fraction 8/8, that you do recognize that that does equal 1 whole. And the final expression, 4/5 times 2/2 is like taking 4/5 times 1 again. Remember, the numerator and denominator are the same, so therefore I am multiplying essentially by 1. And anytime we multiply a number by 1, it always equals that same number. So this would also be in the equal to box. So for this question, make sure you recognize that if it is a whole number or a mixed number, your answer would be greater than the fraction. If you have a fraction times fraction and both fractions are less than 1, it would be less than. And if you have a fraction times 1, it would be equal to. And make sure that you are checking out to see if any of those fractions have the same numerator and denominator, so that way you know that it is being multiplied by 1. Moving on to question number 8. This says a postcard has an area of 24 square inches. Two enlargements of the postcard have areas of 54 square inches and 96 square inches. In each postcard, the length is 1 1/2 times the width. Which of the following could be the dimensions of the postcard or one of the enlargements? Mark all that apply. So our first thing that we have to do, because we have 3 different areas of 24, 54, and 96, we need to multiply the length times width together, or our dimensions that are given for each choice, to see if any of them equal 24, 54, or 96. So for A, 6 times 9 does equal 54. For B, 10 times 15 equals 150. Well, I know 150 is not one of my 3 areas, so I'm going to go ahead and eliminate B because it didn't give me the correct square inches. C, 8 times 12 equals 96. So there's another one that is potentially an answer. D, 6 times 12 equals 72. 72 was not an area that I could have, so I'm going to eliminate D. And then E, I have 4 times 6, which equals 24. So we do have 3 choices that are the square inches that it says the area can be. We are going to double check that all 3 have a length that is 1 1/2 times their width. So for each of these, I am going to take the 6 inches, and I'm going to start over here for A. I'm going to have my 6 over 1 times 1 1/2 to see if this gives me the 9 inches. So I do have to change that 1 1/2 into an improper fraction. So I now have 6 over 1 times 3 over 2. So I am going to cancel. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 3 times 3 is 9 over 1, and that does equal 9. So A does work out where the 9 is 1 1/2 times larger than the 6. So A is one of the choices that I can go ahead and fill in. We've already eliminated B, so we're going to check C now. So for C, I'm going to take my 8 over 1, and we know 1 1/2 does equal 3 halves, so I'm just going to go ahead and write the 3 halves. I am going to cancel before I multiply both of them by 2. So 8 divided by 2 is 4, 2 divided by 2 is 1. Now 4 times 3 is 12 over 1, which equals 12, and that does give me the length. So C is another choice that I can go ahead and fill in. And now for E, since D was already eliminated because of not having the correct area, 4 over 1 times 3 halves, which is our 1 1/2. Canceling the 4 and the 2, 4 divided by 2 is 2, 2 divided by 2 is 1. 2 times 3 is 6 over 1, and that does equal 6, which it is the length. So E also works out. So after we find the area, we do have to multiply the first number by however many times it's greater the second number should be greater than, to make sure it does equal that second number. So when I did that, 6 times 1 and 1/2, it did give me 9. When I multiplied 8 times 1 and 1/2, it equals 12. And when I multiplied 4 times 1 and 1/2, it did equal 6. So I had to have both the width and the length answers. All right, moving on to question number 9. Question number 9 says, in a 5th grade class, 4/5 of the girls have brown hair. Of the brown-haired girls, 3/4 of them have long hair. Of the girls with long brown hair, 1/3 of them have green eyes. So for part A, we need to figure out what fraction of the girls in class have long brown hair first. So we know that 4/5 of the girls have brown hair. It says, of the brown-haired girls, 3/4 of them have long hair. So we're going to multiply 4/5 times 3/4. So I do want to cancel before multiplying. The 4's both change into 1's. Now I have 1/3, or 1 times 3 equals 3. 5 times 1 equals 1. And I know that 3/5 is simplest form, so I do know that 3/5 of the girls have long brown hair. Now for part B, it says, what fraction of the girls in class have long brown hair and green eyes? We are not going to have to explain how we found our answer. We are just going to show how many of the girls. So if you go back up to the question, it says, of the girls with long brown hair, which we just found was 3/5, 1/3 of them have green eyes. So we need to multiply the answer we found from A by 1/3, and that will give us the girls that have long brown hair and green eyes. So I am going to cancel the 3's by 3. Those both change into 1's. So 1 times 1 is 1. 5 times 1 is 5. So 1/5 of the girls have long brown hair and green eyes. Moving on to the next page, on page 468, we are going to eliminate question number 10. Move down to question number 11. Question number 11 states that Doreen lives 3/4 mile from the library. Sheila lives 1/3 as far away from the library as Doreen. For A through C, choose yes or no to answer each question. So 11A, they want to know, does Doreen live farther from the library than Sheila? So we can actually figure this out by taking Doreen's length, which is 3/4, times, because Sheila says she lives 1/3 as far, so 1/3. And from lesson 7.5, without doing any multiplication, it states that a fraction times a fraction is less than both factors. So therefore, does Doreen live farther from the library? Well, we can say yes, she does, because 3/4 will be greater than the distance that Sheila lives. Now for B, they want to know, does Sheila live 1/4 mile from the library? So now we do have to go ahead and multiply our 3/4 times 1/3. The 3's will cancel and change into 1's. So now I have 1 times 1 is 1, 4 times 1 is 4. So we did get the answer of 1/4. So yes, she does live 1/4 mile from the library. So now for 11C, does Sheila live twice as far from the library than Doreen? Well, we know that Doreen lives 3/4 of a mile away, and Sheila is only 1/4 of a mile away. So actually, because Sheila is closer, she does not live twice as far, so the answer for this one is no. Moving on to question number 12. Number 12 says, Tanika took a test that had 20 multiple choice questions and 10 true-false questions. She got 9/10 of the multiple choice questions correct, and she got 4/5 of the true and false questions correct. For 12A, how many multiple choice questions did Taniqua get correct? Well, we know for multiple choice, she had 20 questions, and it says for the multiple choice, she got 9/10 of those questions correct. So we are going to take 20 over 1 times 9/10. I am going to cancel the 20 and the 10, both by 10. 20 divided by 10 is 2. 10 divided by 10 is 1. Now multiply. 2 times 9 is 18. 1 times 1 is 1. 18 over 1 equals 18. So we know that she got 18 multiple choice questions correct. And now for B, it says how many true false questions did she get correct? Well, she did have 10 true false questions times, and it says she has 4/5 of those correct, so times 4/5. I am going to cancel a 5 out of both the 10 and the 5. So 10 divided by 5 is 2. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 2 times 4 is 8 over 1 times 1 is 1. And 8 over 1 equals 8. So she got 8 true false questions correct. Moving on to the next page. Question number 13 says, the table shows how many hours some of the part-time employees at the toy store worked last week. This is a matching question on Schoology as well, where you will have the table that lists the names and the number of hours worked. And then it says for this week, Conrad will work 1 3/4 times as long as last week. Giovanni will work 1 1/3 times as long as last week. Sally will work 2/3 of the hours she worked last week. Match each employee's name to the number of hours he or she will work this week. So starting with Conrad, it says Conrad, he's going to work 1 3/4 times as long as last week. So last week he worked 6 2/3 hours, and it's going to be 1 3/4 times as long. So we are going to multiply 6 2/3 times 1 3/4 to find Conrad's hours for this week. So changing both into improper fractions, 3 times 6 is 18, plus 2 is 20 over 3, and then 4 times 1 is 4, plus 3 is 7, so times 7 over 4. I am going to cancel the 20 and 4 both by 4. 20 divided by 4 is 5, 4 divided by 4 is 1. 5 times 7 is 35. 3 times 1 is 3. So when I TiVo 35 divided by 3, 3 goes into 3 one time, which is 3. Subtract 0. 3 goes into 5 one time again, and that's 3. Subtract, which leaves me with 2. So now I have 11 2/3 hours for Conrad. So on Schoology, you would drag up the mixed number that matches Conrad, but for this review, we're just going to connect the dots. Next, Giovanni. It says Giovanni worked 9.5 hours last week, times, and this week was 1 1/3 times as long. So again, we are changing both into improper fractions. 2 times 9 is 18, plus 1 is 19, so 19 halves, times 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4, so 4/3. So I am going to cancel the 2 and the 4 both by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2, 2 divided by 2 is 1. 19 times 2 is 38 over 3. So now I'm going to show my TiVo. 38 divided by 3. Well, I already know that 3 times 12 is 36, so I'm going to put the 12 and then subtract 36, just to save me some room. And 38 minus 36 is 2. So Giovanni worked 12 2/3 hours. So matching Giovanni's hours to his dot. Now obviously we can easily tell that Sally was only 7 1/6, but we are going to go ahead and prove our answer. So Sally's time last week was 10 3/4 times, and then this week it was only 2/3 the hours. So times 2/3. So to change the 10 3/4, I have 4 times 10 is 40, plus 3 is 43 over 4 times 2/3. The 2 and the 4 are both going to be divided by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So 43 times 1 is 43. 2 times 3 is 6. So now I do have to T-bow 43 divided by 6. 6 times 7 is 42. Subtract, that leaves me with 1. So I do get the 7 1/6 hours for Sally. Moving on to question number 14. Number 14 says Peggy is making a quilt using panels that are 1/2 foot by 1/2 foot. The quilt is 5.5 feet long and 4 feet wide. So for part A, it says let each square of the grid below represent 1/2 foot by 1/2 foot. Draw a rectangle on the grid to represent the quilt. So on Schoology, this will be either a drag and drop or multiple choice question. And you are going to have to select the grid that matches the 5.5 feet by 4 feet, where each square on the grid is representing 1/2 foot by 1/2 foot. So I know that if I have one section of a square right here equals 1/2 of a foot, it will take 2 of those squares to create 1 entire foot. So working with the 4 feet wide that is going down, I know every 2 squares will be 1 foot. So to start my line over, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I have 1/2 of a foot that represents 1 square, and I have 2 squares to get a foot, 4 times 2 is 8. So I need to make sure that my line goes 8 squares down. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now doing the same thing for the 5.5 feet. Well, again, if every 2 squares is 1 foot, 5 times 2 is 10. Then I have an additional square that I will have to do because it says 5.5 feet. So I will need 11 squares going straight across. So there's 1 foot, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1/2. And because it does say that we do have to have the rectangle, I have to go ahead and also do the same thing for the bottom and then connect those 2 sides. So now my rectangle is showing 5.5 feet by having 11 squares by 4 feet, which is 8 squares. Again, because 2 squares makes 1 foot. Now moving on to part B, it says, what is the area of the quilt? You will not have to explain how you found your answer, you will just have to give the area. So if you recall, back up in the question, it says the quilt is 5.5 feet by 4 feet wide. And to find area, you take length times width. So I'm going to have 5 1/2 times 4 because it's 5.5 feet by 4 feet wide. So changing that 5 1/2, 2 times 5 is 10, plus 1 is 11 halves. times 4 over 1. Canceling the 4 and the 2 by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So 11 times 2 is 22. 1 times 1 is 1. So this area is 22 square feet. Now the last page of this review, you are going to skip both 15 and 16. So question number 14 was the last question that you will have on your Chapter 7 tests. Please let us know if you have any questions prior to taking your test over Chapter 7. Make sure you re-watch this video, rework any of the questions out that you might need additional help with. Thanks.